Hello and welcome to my art journal. In today's video we're going to look at what you need to do before you start your watercolor. Step 1. Preparing to use watercolor.
The paint that I prefer to use with students is just a simple praying pan palette, and you can get these almost anywhere, Walmart, Hobby Lobby of course. I like to get the ones with a white container. That way when you're mixing your color, you have this lid that works like a palette, and you can get a true sense of, or a true look at what your hue, or when you water it down, what it's going to look like before you put it on your paper. So I have, and this one came with a brush in it. We may or may not use that some, but this is a good little brush here. It's probably, if I had to give it a number, maybe about a size number 4. Well, there's a 4 on there. Awesome. And of course, anytime you get a new brush, they have a little bit of glue in there from the factory. Just wash that out, and it's ready to go. Okay. So I have my palette. I have my paint. I have brushes. The one that came in there is a number 4. I also like to use, I don't try to get too many brushes. Here's a number 4 that I prefer to use. And then just a little bit bigger brush. It's a flat brush, and then I have a large, maybe a 1-inch brush. The important thing with watercolor is to remember that you need a soft bristle brush. And really, depending on what you're painting, you may not use all of these, or you might use it. And it depends on what size paper you're using too, right? To paint on. Okay, so there's my paint, and then paper towel, water, and it is actually clean water. You can't tell that very well. Clean water. And then I usually like to use a piece of cardboard that I'll tape my watercolor paper down to. You do not have to tape it, but it really helps to keep it stable and from puckering. And then watercolor papers, most of the time, you know, if you're in school, you're going to be using a cheaper paper just because of economics and keeping things where people can afford it, and a lot of waste sometimes in school. But I have a couple of sheets here of probably, it feels like it's a little thicker than 140 weight, but it's a nice watercolor paper. It's nice and stiff, and I won't get into all the details about watercolor paper, but it's a cold press and a hot press. But the main thing here is that a watercolor paper is absorbent, and you really need to probably use a watercolor paper if you're playing with watercolor and want to do something nice. And this is a cheaper, I think it's a 90-pound, it might be a 140 weight watercolor paper. That I think it is 140 that I use for school all the time. We use in school all the time. And so and I like to cut the paper down a little bit because you're just learning how. Of course, after you played around and figured it out, you can always go larger. Experiment, and it depends on what kind of watercolor paint you're using too. This one you can be pretty detailed with, and there's all kinds of, there's watercolor paint that's in tubes, there's watercolor paint that's in bottles that's really concentrated, but we're using this for this assignment today, or for today. So cardboard, the really good thing about cardboard is cheap as anywhere, and you're recycling. The bad part about that is if you get your paper super saturated and you're adding color on, and I've seen students do it, where the lines that's in this cardboard will show up on their paper because they've got their paper too saturated with water, and as it dries, those lines will tend to show up on their finished image. And then I just have another piece of cardboard here. This one's more of a smooth finished, and you can see it's like a pressed cardboard. And so you know, if you're really picky, if you could use that, But in reality, most of us are on a budget, and so I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use this. And then I've got one other thing here that I want to show you and talk about a little bit, is that it's just some masking tape. I like to masking tape my, let me zoom out just a little bit here for you guys. Turn it this way maybe. I like to masking tape my paper down for a couple of reasons. One, it helps your paper not pucker as it's drying, keeps a nice stable surface as you're working, so that's two. And then finally, it creates a nice little border if you can get the paper or the tape around there right. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes people don't, and their border looks really wonky and you have to end up cutting it off. But so what I like to do is I like to masking tape, and so I want to leave about, it kind of depends on how you put this first piece of tape down, how much border you're going to put around your whole thing. So I'm just going to see what happens here. The good thing about masking tape is you can see through it as you're putting that down. So you can kind of see that I've got more of the tape on the paper than I do on the cardboard. And so as I turn this around, I want to try to keep it the same amount of coverage. And this is not going to be perfect. Just eyeball it as best you can. What I like to tell the kids is that you know, I like to put down the corner and then pull it across, and they want to tear it in pieces like that, and that's fine. So we got to keep in mind coverage. So about the same coverage here. Go along that edge and just push it down slightly, because as you're doing watercolor, it might kind of go back under there, and you don't want that. It'll run under there, and then you'll have a mess to worry with. All right, so let's get these other two sides. So you just tear that long enough. I almost didn't, and maybe I didn't. Maybe I'll lay that to the side a little bit longer here to go from point A to point B, right? And I always do one side, and then I kind of eyeball it after I push that down and make sure that it's not like that or like that. And you know, this is good practice too, hand-eye coordination. A lot of times students will have a real difficult time with that because they've never done anything like that. And so here's this last piece. See, I tore that piece of tape earlier, and I'm not going to waste it. Just laid it to the side, and I come back to it here. All right. So there's our materials to begin our watercolor painting.
I'd like to thank you for viewing. And if you've liked this episode, please check out Step 2, Reference Material. Thank you so very much. You have a good day, and may God bless you. See you next time on My Art Journal.